The terror in my friend's house. This happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I had gone to my friend's house, and she and her parents were at her soccer game, which I found out later. Her house was 3 lots down the street on the other side. This house had a 6-foot fence around the property, and it opened up to the driveway. Whenever she wasn't home, I would often just wait for her in the backyard, and she had this really nice swing set. So I would sit there just swinging away, waiting for her to come and having a great time. So on this day, I was just watching the house through their kitchen window, and I could see through to the living room, and I could see right through the house out through the front window. I was hoping to see her or her parents walk up to the front door. And then I saw something. I saw a dark, slowly moving object, thing, move across the front room. The next few seconds seemed to last forever. I was no longer swinging. I had stopped, still sitting on my favorite swing. I was no longer feeling well, and I was not happy. I was deathly still, and I was watching this figure, and I held my breath as it started to glide. No, the voice in my head shrieks as the pitch black shadow stops. Panic is starting to set in my young mind. I hold perfectly still, and I tell myself, just, don't move for a moment. I'm intently watching as this figure inside the house starts to turn towards me. I can see no face or any detail, but I feel it has turned around to face me. It's definitely male, and it is so full of hate that every hair on the back of my head and on my neck just feels like it's standing on end because of this horrible hatred. So I'm sitting there and I am terrified. I'm not even able to move. I tell myself that this can't be real. It's all just, something, some illusion or something. But then this thing starts to move kind of out through the house towards me. And it was at that point that I let out this scream. It's almost like I just can feel its intention. It's like it was going to kill me. I was frozen by the hate that I could feel from it. It was so tangible that it felt like this energy from these strong, horrible emotions would kill me. So I looked past the door to the kitchen, to the driveway, and if that thing comes out of the door at me, I'll never make it past, I think. So I look the other way towards the fence. That side doesn't open, but I can climb it. We always did to get to the fields. So I have never climbed it, but I know I can. Looking back at the window, I see the shadow man glide right through the window. I scream again at the top of my lungs as I run towards the field. I never look back. I climb that fence as fast as I possibly can, and I just fell off the top of the fence and I landed on my back. But I jumped right back up as I run as fast as I could for my life back to my house. When I got to my house, I ran straight to my room and I went into my closet and I sat there for 4 hours without moving until my parents convinced me to come out and eat. To this day, I still get chills from when I recall just that intense feeling of hate that was coming from that man, that being, whatever it was. I mean, it was not human. And there is no way that that any human could give out that kind of energy like that sort of strong emotion. It really did feel like it was going to kill me. And I'm just really grateful that I managed to get away. And I think I did the right thing in just running at that moment, that exact moment, before it was too late. If I had waited any longer, it would have been too late. I wonder what that creature was. What happened in that house? Was it an old house? Did somebody have, terrible experience there, or, died in anger? And I don't know. But really glad to hear that you managed to get away from that, because it really sounds like you got away in the nick of time before it was too late. And maybe, your friend's family would have got home and found you, dead out there by the swing or something terrible like that. So, yeah, at least it was a good ending. The ear-shattering scream. This happened several years ago when I was a total deadbeat and I lived with my then girlfriend's parents. They had this 3-level house with the basement that contained our living space and my girlfriend and I's bedroom. Upstairs was the living space for everyone else. There was a dining room and a kitchen. And then the 3rd level had the master bedroom and 2 additional bedrooms for my girlfriend's sisters. I was home alone one night. Her parents were off with friends and my girlfriend was at a friend's place. And her sisters were at an all-night church thing. I decided to stay home and play on the computer all night. Where my computer and desk sat, right above my head, was this AC vent. Often I could hear her sister playing in her room from that vent. So I was sitting at the computer and all of a sudden I heard laughing and giggling coming from the vent. Nobody was supposed to be home. So my heart kind of picked up a pace as I, started to wonder what was going on. I glanced at the clock on my computer and it said 1:36 a.m. I remember this all very, very distinctly. So I went to go and investigate and I headed upstairs. Now, the way the landing sits is at the top of those stairs. You can turn left and either go upstairs or go into the kitchen. I climbed the 2nd set of stairs and opened the first door on the left, which was her young sister's room, which is directly above that basement. Inside, I used the light of my phone to illuminate as best I could. I saw a small figure, what I assumed was a small girl wrapped in a white sheet in the center of the room. At this point, it's like my heart just leapt into my mouth or wherever the expression is. This figure, this young girl, stopped playing with the dolls and she turned slowly to look at me. And then there was this, this is where I just almost died. This child, whatever it was, let out the most ear-shattering scream that you could ever imagine. My skin crawls just thinking about it, and my chest tightens as I remember it. I wish I could tell you what transpired, but I remember just waking up at the bottom of the landing right next to the door of the kitchen. I stumbled into the kitchen to get a drink of water and contemplate what the hell just happened. I glanced at the clock on the microwave, and the clock read 4:46 a.m. We never found the sheet the next day, but the dolls the figure was playing with were sitting in the middle of the room, away from the toy chest, which they were inside of that afternoon when she cleaned her room, which is across the room. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't turn on the light. That's all well and good, and I would have done that. However, the light in the room operated on a pull cord connected to a fan in the center of the room. Flicking the light switch would have done me no good. And if you think I could have taken a photo, well, maybe I should have, since I did have my phone on me. However, this phone was so old, it didn't even have a camera. All it was used for was for calling people. And the other thing too was that, I was so stunned, and this kind of happened so fast, I was sort of in shock. So even if it did have a phone, I'm not sure I could have done anything. My hands were probably just shaking too much. There are so many strange stories of children, ghosts of children, and they're really kind of sinister, and I guess in their innocence and purity, you would never expect that to be the case, but it's almost like something gets kind of twisted, the nature of a child, can become something very sinister when it's sort of turned around from that innocence and purity into something sinister like that. So it makes me wonder why this little girl was there. And also, what happened after this? Did you ever see her again? Or, what happened? Has anybody else ever seen her? Makes you wonder. The water monster. This happened in east central Alabama, and this was quite a long time ago. It was about 40 years ago. I was about 19 years old by then. I'm 5'2", and at the time I weighed about 95 pounds. This is actually relevant. I had a nephew a few years younger than me who was more like a kid brother. I was kind of a country girl. I spent my years up until then roaming around in the woods, encountering plenty of wild animals, etc. I offered to take my nephew fishing early one morning at a somewhat remote pond near my childhood home. We set up on the bank about 30 feet apart with a small bushy tree in between us, so we were out of sight of each other. We were happily fishing and enjoying a beautiful sunny spring morning when suddenly my nephew says, "Aunt, what is that in the water?" I looked up to see a huge snake-like head sticking up out of the water and cruising by about 20 feet from the bank. I dropped my rod right there and I yelled, "What in the hell is that?" and started backing up the bank, keeping my eyes locked on the whatever it was. And it heard me. Its head quickly snapped around in my direction, and then it turned away and it dove down. A long stretch of shiny brown body arched out of the water behind it before it completely disappeared. My nephew, who was now terrified, dropped his rod and ran over to me, as I was frantically trying to look for any sign of the creature and check the further bank to see if I saw it come out over there. Past the spot I was standing, the bank was overgrown with small trees and bushes, so it could have come ashore invisibly just a few feet from us. We grabbed our stuff and we just got the hell out of there, and we just made it to the car. So the sun was pretty low and shining towards us across the pond. So all I saw at first was a silhouette. It was a streamlined, hence the snaky look, head nearly as big as mine, and it was sticking up out of the water on several inches of neck, nearly as big as the head. Nothing else was visible, and it was just cruising along without splashing or making much wake when it turned and dove. The angle of the light changed enough that I could see it was brown. It seemed to take forever for the body to disappear, so it was so long, and it looked nearly as big around as I was. The rear end never surfaced. After seeing that, I was really quite shaken, as I had, and still have, no idea what we saw. My first reaction was that it was a giant snake, a gigantic serpent. But of course, there's no snake that big, especially in Alabama. The creature had been swimming with its head held up, erect out of the water, and it was swimming very smoothly without any disturbance. It dove to get away, so it was very comfortable holding its breath and swimming underwater. And the pond has no real connection with large bodies of water. It was originally dug to drain a swampy area in the middle of the woods and just has a small stream draining out of it. The only thing I can think of that might fit the bill here is a river otter, which are rare in these parts. And how did one end up in a small pond in the middle of the woods, many miles from any river or large body of water? And also, this thing was huge. I'm just baffled, and it still bothers me these 40 years later. What animal did we see? And if it was an otter, how and why did a huge otter end up in such a remote pond? I'm baffled, and it still bothers me 40 years later. What animal did we see? If you were to check on Google Maps, you would see that, there's now a house there, but at the time, there was no house there. The single house on top of the hill to the west was the only nearby house. The road running through there was just plain unpaved dirt. You can see that the Coosa River is about 3 miles to the west. There is this tiny little creek about 3/4 of a mile to the east, and a pond, small lake, past that. None of those bodies of water have a water connection to the pond. We were standing on the west bank, right about where it starts curving into that cove. The animal was swimming north-ish, about 20 feet from the bank, and basically following the curve into the cove. When it dove, it turned towards the bank directly north of us. That clump of trees there may be the 40 years later small trees and bushes separating me from my nephew. He was on the south side, and I was on the north side right in the beginning of that curve. And just to give an idea of what this thing kind of looked like, if you can imagine a squirrel's head, a very large squirrel's head, remove the ears and whiskers, and that is pretty much the shape of the silhouette that I saw. Now, increase that to the size of something like a cocker spaniel. Put it horizontally, like in the picture, on top of the longer vertical neck, and that's pretty much it. There was about 3 inches of clearance between the water and the bottom of the head, with a tiny little bow wave in front of the neck. I'm not sure how deep the water was there, so it's possible that this creature wasn't really swimming, but sort of walking or pulling itself along the bottom. This might explain why the body wasn't visible at the surface of the water and why there wasn't much of a wake behind it. So anyway, 40 years later, and this just still confounds me. I have no idea. And we have gone back a few times and we haven't seen anything. But, perhaps somebody else has. I don't know. Well, there are quite a few sightings of sea monsters and water monsters, whatever you call them, all around the world, So, and definitely even in the United States, I believe there was a time when, sea monsters used to be seen quite frequently by a lot of people, especially in the 1800s. And no doubt some of them were hoaxes, but also, I'm sure that a few of them were genuine. Some of them may have been people who thought they saw something, but, that was a monster, but really wasn't. But somewhere in there's a percentage that was real. So that's really fascinating. There was something in my house. I got home one day from my job as a server, and It was about midnight. One of my roommates was in the Navy and was deployed at the time, and the other one was at his girlfriend's house. So I cooked myself dinner, and as I was cooking, I noticed that my dog was acting kind of weird. He was growling and sort of barking towards the middle of the room at nothing that I could see. This was especially strange because he never ever barked. He was a rescue, and I bought him as, for a sense of security when I'm home alone. I'm a female. And I could never get him to bark at anyone. So anyway, I dismissed her barking as just, some odd thing, and I finished cooking and I ate. I started to clean up and I turned the sink on because it takes forever to get it hot. But right when I turned around, the sink turned off on its own. The water just stopped running. Again, I think that was kind of odd, and I wondered if there was something wrong with the plumbing. But I didn't really think, it was anything worth freaking out over. I figured I would just get someone to maybe look at it, to see if there was something wrong. But the hair on the back of my dog at this point was standing straight up on end, and no one was home, and it was midnight. So I figured I would just, tough it out, even though I was starting to get a little bit creeped out at this point. And after cleaning, I went in the bathroom and I was at the sink plucking my eyebrows. My bathroom's kind of small, and the sink immediately is to the right as you enter, with the toilet next to it. There's a bathtub at the end and toilet paper dispenser directly across the toilet. It was a really narrow room, so you could reach the toilet paper while sitting on the toilet. So the way I was sitting, the toilet paper dispenser was actually right behind me. After 2 to 3 minutes of just sort of sitting or standing there, I heard a weird noise behind me. I turned around and I see the whole roll of toilet paper was unraveling fast as hell by itself, as if somebody was pulling it. I got the hell out of that bathroom. The door was closed and it had no windows, so it couldn't have been a breeze. I put a leash on my dog and I ran out of that apartment faster than anything. By the time this happened, it was already 2 a.m. None of my friends were awake, so I spent the night sitting outside of the door to my apartment. When I went back the next morning, the whole roll of toilet paper was on the ground, and the roll was probably 3/4 full. I'm talking about a good 5 to 10 meters of toilet paper. After that day, I never had an odd experience quite like that one ever again. But one of my roommates did mention that a few times he'd come home and find every door and cabinet in the place open, when he'd specifically remembered closing them and leaving them that way when he left. This was when I was on vacation out of state, and our other roommate was still deployed. So I don't know what was going on in that place, but I did get the feeling that it was haunted by something, someone, I don't know what.